Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the powerful intersection of communication, influence, and leadership. Let me ask you something. What do TED icons, visionary CEOs like Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, and the most magnetic leaders of our time have in common? They don't just present ideas, they inspire movements. They don't just inform, they ignite emotion. They make their messages stick in boardrooms, on stages, and in the hearts of audiences all around the world. So today we're diving into these timeless strategies of master communicators drawn from the brilliant work of Carmine Gallo, who is a best-selling author of books such as Talk Like TED, 5 Stars, The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, and the Bezos Blueprint. We'll unpack how the best leaders turn complexity into clarity, stories into strategy, and passion into persuasion. So whether you're leading a team, pitching an idea, or just trying to move hearts and minds, this episode is for you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. Let's start with the foundation, right, of all great communication, and that's purpose. Because without passion, you're just delivering information. But with it, you can move mountains. And you have said that the best leaders don't just have jobs, they have callings. But instead of asking people, which I love this, what's your passion? You recommend something better. What's that question and why is it so powerful?
Yeah, this came to me when I was working on one of the books that I know you've enjoyed is Talk Like TED, about how to give that TED style presentation. And before that, I wrote a book on presentation secrets of Steve Jobs. So between those books, something just started to rumble. Okay. And it was all about this idea of passion, because Steve Jobs was a big believer in follow what you're passionate about. But I also think that following your passion is a little cliche, and it also doesn't help me very much as a business professional. I'm passionate about golf, but good thing I didn't make a career out of it. uh, would have had a problem there. So the point is that you got to go beyond passion. And Steve Jobs, even though he is quoted often as saying, follow your passion. In fact, if you go on the internet right now, it's a very popular quote from one of his talks. But if you dig a little deeper into his presentations and his Steve Jobs' interviews, you'll find that the definition of passion is a little bit more specific and focused. And I love this idea. So instead of asking, what is it that I'm passionate about? Ask yourself, what is it that makes my heart sing? At the end of one of his last major presentations, his public presentations, Steve Jobs said, it's the intersection of technology and liberal arts that makes my heart sing. That's what made him such a creative and engaging presenter and speaker, because he was speaking from the heart about computer design and art and all the beautiful things that we can adapt from the world of art to computers. That's what he was passionate about. He wasn't passionate about computers. He certainly wasn't passionate about speeds and feeds. I found an old interview from Steve Jobs, like 1984, and he was giving a talk to his staff, and he said, people don't care about speeds and feeds. They care about what they can do with computers. So let's tap into that passion. Let's tap into their values and what they see for themselves. That's the difference, Charles, between an average speaker who actually just who gives you facts and information, maybe does so very clearly, and someone who, like you said, inspires and ignites a movement.
And when you know what makes your heart sing, you don't just talk about your work, you share a mission. And that's what draws people in. Like the founder of Zappos, right? He didn't say he was passionate about shoes. He said he was passionate about delivering happiness. That shift in framing is essential.
I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up, because ever since Tony Hsieh passed away, I feel like what he brought to the table and his unique insights are kind of lost out there. And yet, when I met Tony Hsieh, I went out to Las Vegas where Zappos was, and it was the most memorable one of the most memorable professional experiences of my life. And I wrote about it, and he left such an impression on me. And that's exactly right. He was one of the many people I interviewed. And I realized very early on in our conversations, he was not passionate about shoes. In fact, he wasn't one of those sneaker nerds who loved all the new shoes. Shoes was secondary. It was, how do we deliver happiness? That was the name of his book. How do we make customers so loyal that they'll want to come back again and again? And the only way to do that is to make them happy with each and every interaction. So let's figure out the best way to do that, from the time they log on to our customer service calls to the way the shoes are delivered. When you understand what is it that I'm truly passionate about, what makes my heart sing, that becomes such a much more engaging conversation. And also, you're a much more interesting entrepreneur if you start with that question. Don't ask, what do I do? Okay, that's just a title. So, Charles, the way this works in coaching, when I work with executives or emerging leaders within a lot of the biggest companies out there, when I'm trying to get them to present better, more effectively, more persuasively, I used to start with, okay, tell me what you do. And they go right to their title, and it's quite boring because the title doesn't tell you anything. Then I started asking, well, okay, what are you passionate about? And they would give me sort of a marketing line, or just something that I could grab from a website that's not distinct. And then I started asking, what is it that makes your heart sing? And you can tell they paused, they thought about it. One guy who worked at one of the biggest top 5 companies in the world thought about it and almost got teary eyed. And he said, gosh, why have I stayed at this company for so long? Why have I been here for 25 years? Carmine, it's relationships, the relationships that I've built all over the world. And he started getting teary eyed and emotional. That's when I knew, it's the question. Steve Jobs thought differently because he asked different questions.
Speaking of connection, let's talk about the secret sauce behind every great talk. It's one of my favorite topics. It's not talked about enough in leadership, and that's storytelling. Many people feel like they're either born a storyteller or they're not, but it's a skill that anyone can develop. So, why do stories beat data when it comes to persuasion?
We are wired for story. One of the fascinating insights that I've had from writing about presentation of Steve Jobs, Talk Like Ted, and some of my other books is when I start talking to neuroscientists and people who study history of and evolutionary biologists, even Yuval Noah Harari, who's a historian who wrote *Sapiens*. He told me this too. So now I'm starting to see a pattern, and the pattern is from cognitive scientists to historians like Yuval Noah Harari. They all conclude that the reason sapiens, our species, became so dominant was because, not because we were bigger or stronger than other species or other animals, but it's because we developed language. And then from language, we developed the ability to cooperate in massive numbers. And how do we cooperate? By convincing other people to join you on your journey, to work together and to follow your idea. Storytelling. Storytellers from the beginning of time, from when our ancestors would gather around a campfire outside a cave. Once language was developed, give or take 40,000 years, they started telling stories. That's how we became explorers. There's a whole new book on the famous explorers and how we as a species became explorers, because most species are perfectly fine living where they're living. They don't care about crossing an ocean to see what's on the other side. We do, because it's the stories that informed, illuminated, and inspired other people. So there's a long history now of storytelling, and there's also neuroscience that backs this up. I've had several cognitive scientists tell me that the brain locks onto a narrative. If it sees a PowerPoint, it tunes out. If it hears too much information that are just facts, figures, data, it turns out. Tell me a story. Oh, now I'm tuning in. So that tells me we're wired for it, Charles. So if we're wired for it, shouldn't you be adept at telling a good story and at least understanding how storytelling fits into our everyday lives so that you can be more persuasive, more effective?
Absolutely right. I had Dr. Paul Zak on the program several times. He said the same thing. We're wired for stories. We remember it more. And stories create this emotional engagement. They activate multiple areas of your brain. He says data informs, stories can transform, and they make people care. And you mentioned there's three types of stories that a leader can use to help build their influence and their authority. And that's personal stories, stories of others that inspire and teach, and then the success and failure stories, often connected maybe to a brand. But what I love you also mentioned here, which I think is so critical for leaders to note, is they are not the heroes of the story.
The You mentioned Paul Zak. Oh man, I love his work. I love Paul Zak's work. He dropped in something that he taught me a long time ago, the oxytocin, so that when people hear a story, he used to take blood tests. I don't think they do that anymore. Now it's like electrodes on your head, less invasive, but you have a higher dopamine, higher oxytocin in your bloodstream when you hear a story versus when you don't hear a story, and that makes you pay attention. It's an emotional connection as well. So yeah, but I love talking to people like that. It's interesting because we're all arriving at the same conclusions, just from very different experiences and backgrounds, but all arriving at the same conclusions. There's a pattern here, folks, and that's you got to be a good storyteller to stand out. Now, you asked Charles about the different types of stories. Every time you tell a personal story, that's a way of connecting with people. So instead of just going right to your PowerPoint, why don't you ask yourself, what is it about this topic that I'm passionate about? Going back to our initial conversation, what is it that I'm really excited about? What makes my heart sing? And what should you be excited about given this research, this project, this product that I'm introducing today? Start thinking about your own personal story and how it relates to the topic or the presentation at hand. If you watch the TED Talks, so I wrote the book Talk Like TED. If you watch TED Talks, almost everyone who's let's say top 25 TED Talks almost always start with a personal story, but not just any personal story, a story that obviously reinforces the topic. So Brian Stevenson is one of my favorite speakers. He gave a very famous TED Talk. He is a human rights attorney. Now, he successfully has argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. He knows how to talk and he knows how to persuade. When I first saw his TED Talk, which anybody can watch on TED.com, you'll see that he starts with a story about his grandmother. So he's talking about very personal stories about his grandmother and how she gave him a sense of purpose and all that. And I was like, when I had my first opportunity to interview Brian Stevenson, I said, what's with the grandmother's story? Like, here we are talking about mass incarceration and all the challenges and problems. You start with your grandmother. Charles, I I'm I swear he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, that's because everybody has a grandmother." It's an instant connection. So I was looking for like something deep. Why? Tell me about the power of narrative, Brian. And instead he just said, "Yeah, everyone has a grandmother. It's an instant connection. They seem to like it." But it kind of reminds me that people just want an instant connection with you. So if you can somehow find those personal anecdotes or examples, or it doesn't even have to be a long story, it could be 30 seconds, but something that kind of ties in your unique personality and the topic, and people like you. I just talked to a neuroscientist named John Medina. Just spoke with him a few weeks earlier, a few weeks before this podcast. And he told me not only, he's a molecular biologist. He said not only does the brain lock on to stories and narrative, but he said people focus on the PowerPoint, but really, you know what your audience is thinking within the first minute or so that you're speaking? They're not looking at your slides. They're evaluating you. Friend or foe? Do I like this person or not? And I said, John, how do I make that connection? He said, oh, Well, you could tell a story about yourself. Oh, okay, got it. So it's all coming. You see these patterns, Charles, that it's all coming together. But personal stories very impactful. And now people tell me, "Oh, Karma, I don't really have a personal story." That, of course, you do. Everyone has a story, but that's okay. You don't if you're not if you're uncomfortable with it. Don't tell a personal story. How about a case study? We all have case studies. In fact, they're in most of our presentation. Here is an example of a customer who was using this particular product and how happy they are and how it changed their life. You're storytelling. You don't call yourself a storyteller, but that's what it is. We call it a case study, a white paper. It's a story. It's not a story about you, it's a story about somebody else. But weave those in. I'm starting to see some studies out there. I haven't been able to publish them because companies that are behind it aren't giving me all of the data, but I think we know this intuitively. They're recording sales calls. So there's a few companies out there that our enterprise customers are going to know. They record the sales calls, they analyze the data, they analyze the sales calls. Well, I'm hearing from them behind the scenes that those salespeople who introduce case studies within the first 2 minutes are far more successful at making the sale. So here's the big point. Next time you give a presentation or a pitch or you've got a business meeting, don't see yourself as a presenter. The PowerPoint, slides, whatever you have to support your idea is just that. It's supporting material. You're the storyteller, though. Draft the story first and then use images or slides to complement the story. But the story comes first.
So now that we've explored passion and storytelling, let's go into how the brain processes and retains information and what it means for crafting messages that actually stick. So let's start with one of the most toughest and most valuable skills in communication, making your ideas memorable in just a few words. So crafting these tweetable headlines isn't easy. What is your approach to making big ideas simple and sticky, like what Lincoln did in 272 words of the Gettysburg Address that people quote to this day and have elementary classes memorize as part of their history curriculum?
hmm I'm glad you brought that up. I was just looking up some notes that I wrote about the Bezos Blueprint, which is my most recent book. And Jeff Bezos was a master of making things incredibly simple to understand. Now, I had read many of shareholder letters from Amazon that Jeff Bezos wrote, and some of them are must read within certain entrepreneurs and communities. I talked to one famous entrepreneur who said, "I always refer back to the first Jeff Bezos letter that he wrote to shareholders in 1997." I thought, "Oh, that's kind of interesting. Why would he do that?" So then when you read it, it's very inspirational and visionary. So I understand why people like to read these shareholder letters. What I noticed from the letters is they were remarkably simple. Simple meaning, okay, I don't like that adage, keep it simple, stupid. Remember that, KISS? Yeah, that doesn't help me. It never helped me as a communicator. What exactly does that mean? Keep it simple. So I had to break it down. Simple is hard. It's hard to take something that's complex and make it
It's
simple.
much easier to do the other way around,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, which is why most PowerPoint presentations, frankly, are boring. They're long, they're too long, they're convoluted, they're confusing.
Right.
That's why you have to study those communicators who are really, really good at making things simple. You know what they do? They use short words to talk about hard things. Short, one syllable, maybe two syllable words that are written in eighth grade language, eighth grade reading ability. So there's something out there called Flesh Kincaid, which is a reading ability tool that they use for textbooks. Well, now with AI, you can take a draft that you've written, put it in there, and ask what is the readability level, and it'll show you. You don't even have to use a special tool like I did when I was writing some of the books. AI will show you. Is this for an eighth grade reading level or is it for a PhD reading level? There's a big difference. And when you write something for eighth grade level, you'll find that it's not dumbing down the content. In fact, the content can be quite complex. It simply means Shorter words replacing longer or convoluted words or jargon, shorter, tighter sentences, easier flow in between those sentences. It's more how you structure it. But Jeff Bezos had to simplify. He was forced to simplify because if you look at some of the early interviews from Jeff Bezos, he said that in 1994, 1995, when he started Amazon, he was raising money and he was pitching the idea. He said the most common question was, what's the internet? So forget about buying books online. It's what's the internet? Then the second most common question was, you want me to do what? Put my credit card number on the internet? They didn't get it. And a lot of people did not invest in his crazy idea because they simply didn't get it. And what he had to do over the years is he became more of a student of communication and learned to simplify complex ideas. So what's extraordinary is that when I took all of the Bezos shareholder letters and I put them through these readability tools, the first ones were much harder to read. As he went on, they became easier and easier. In other words, the grade for their readability went down, like, from 10th grade level to ninth grade to eighth grade level writing. What's extraordinary is the writing got simpler as the issues and the topics he wrote about grew in complexity. Now you're talking about mobile devices. You're talking about artificial intelligence, cloud computing with Amazon Web Services. And yet his writing got simpler. So that's the trick. And it's hard. Good writing is hard. It's a skill, but you can develop it. The first step is to realize that people will recall and remember information, especially complex information, if it is delivered in the fewest, simplest words possible. Takes a little courage to do that, though, Charles. Takes a little courage because we all want to sound intelligent. We want to sound like a PhD. You got to have a balance between the technical and also trimming and replacing long words or short words for long words. Look at John F. Kennedy's speech in his inaugural speech. Have you ever gone to the JFK Museum in Boston?
I have not.
Oh, it's a beautiful museum. They have, I mean, for a communication guy, I get goosebumps when I was there. They have the actual speech, that the draft of the speech behind glass, the famous inauguration speech, ask not what you will do for your country. And in it, I remember there's red lines. So he took out like friend or foe. I forgot what the original word was for foe. It wasn't enemy, it was something even longer. And he scratched it out and he put foe, friend or foe. Sounds better, short, one syllable. Winston Churchill did that. There's a brand new Netflix documentary on Winston Churchill. He thought long and hard about what he wanted to say before he opened his mouth. And then he tried to strive for the fewest words possible. And those words are the most quotable parts of the speeches that we know today because they were short, simple, more evocative, more emotional. There's a whole history to this in the art of writing. But again, it's not something that the average business person knows. So I like to, just like Steve Jobs was the intersection of technology and liberal arts, I'm sort of the intersection of art and commerce, art and business.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're right. Great leaders have a way to simplify that language. I remember when John said 1,000 songs in your pocket, that language was vivid, concrete, and surprising because I find that if you don't simplify, people won't remember. Worse, they're going to remember it probably wrong. And confusion kills clarity, and clarity drives action. But it's not just about how short it is, it's also about how different it is. So let's explore what neuroscience tells us about novelty and memory. And you talk about novelty and dopamine. How can speakers use that to their advantage when they're speaking?
Yeah, novelty is, again, one of those things that we now know about how the human brain works that is proven. This is why people pay attention. And it's evolutionary. If something is moving, it catches our attention. So a story will catch our attention. So something that is different in your environment is called novelty. And there's a lot of neuroscience behind this, a lot of science in the literature of communication. Novelty simply means, oh, it's a surprise. I think Steve Jobs knew about this long before the rest of us did. I think he was either intuitive about it or he studied it. He understood novelty. You mentioned 1,000 songs in your pocket. Okay. What was the most memorable part? We didn't see this live. Most of us didn't see it live, but we all know what was the most memorable part of the iPod presentation and the launch of the original iPod. So most people would have put a photograph of the iPod on a PowerPoint chart. And they would have had a list, then bullet points after bullet points after bullet points of the features, the benefits, and maybe even a pie chart or a chart or two. Very few people would have thought of doing something as creative as saying, I happen to have one right here. It's in my pocket. Then he comes out, and then in perfect timing, it's the iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. Nobody remembers that the iPod was originally a 5 gigabyte device. It had 5 gigabytes of storage, which apparently back then was a lot, especially for a portable device. But there were other portable devices. The difference was it's 1,000 songs. Oh, in my pocket. Oh, now I want it. If it was just, here's another mobile device with 5 gigabytes of storage and you can play music off it, well, there were apparently a lot of other devices on the market too. 1,000 songs in my pocket. Oh, that's different. Oh, yeah. Okay. Tell me more about that. It's novelty. And he did this, Steve Jobs did this in every presentation. That's the genius of Steve Jobs as a communicator. You refer to something that was the MacBook Air. And I think he also did something similar with the iPad, but the MacBook Air is the one I remember, where he did have a chart. He did have your typical slides with data, a few charts, and he purposely did that and said, rather than just seeing more slides on this, why don't I show it to you? I have it right here. In fact, it's so thin that they delivered it to me in this office envelope. So, remember the manila inner office envelopes? And he pulled it. He made a show. It was like a magic show. He pulled it out slowly and he said, here it is, the thinnest notebook in the world, the MacBook Air. That's what people remember. And if you look up Steve Jobs' introduction, MacBook Air, I think it was 2007, 8. I forgot when the first MacBook Air came out. But if you look it up on the internet, that's the picture you'll see. You will see that was the image that flooded all of the news back then, because people are looking for something different. I recently learned, and I'm sure you already know this or we know it intuitively, but I recently have more evidence now because I've talked to a couple of scientists about it, how much we actually remember. We forget about 90% of what we hear. So that tells me it is up to us to determine what people are going to take away from a conversation. And more likely than not, they're going to take away something that's somewhat intriguing or surprising that they didn't expect.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.